Hey, good morning, and welcome to another weekly edition of Account-Based Friday. We've got a special guest joining us from the sales side today, an SDR expertise, Steve Richard of Mediafly, who heads sales enablement and revenue enablement for Mediafly. We're going to do a deep dive into Steve's background. I am really excited to talk about multi-threaded opportunities and account expansion and kind of trends that he sees. But first, just to kind of orient you, my co-host Meg Hewer and I, Meg's a former CMO, also ran research at Serious Decisions. She and I have done about 200 of these videos over the last 3 years on best practices around go-to-market strategies. If you have a question, you can certainly put your question here in LinkedIn and we can promote it up for Steve or Meg or I to help address. But if you have a question that's not related to today's topic, we could either point you to the videos, or in the upper corner of the screen, you'll see that there's a QR code. That QR code brings you right to those videos. You can like and subscribe so you get these videos fed to you automatically. We're broadcasting today on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and we're broadcasting across 3 different LinkedIn networks. So welcome for those of you who are joining us. And just as format, each week we start off with a poll, and this week's poll no different. And we talked a little bit about multi-threading. And, the question was, how often are companies really recognizing that they have to do this multi-threading approach in today's selling environment, especially in 2024? And the 4 choices I gave were always, sometimes, and never. And there's my dog barking. I don't know if you could hear that in the background, but always, sometimes, and never. And then majority of the people said sometimes. I think there's some resistance here, but I don't know. Meg, what was your reaction to this week's poll?
Yeah, first of all, super excited about this topic. And Steve, thank you so much for joining us. This is a great, timely thing to be discussing. I picked sometimes, and I think that's, at least in my experience, that's the case. In some accounts, in some deals, reps and the sales team are engaging with multiple people, either multiple people in a buying group or multiple buying groups within a given organization. But I don't see it done systematically, and it's not insisted upon in many sales methodologies, which in my view is a pretty big mistake, because it's a great route to efficient revenue. So Steve, would love to get your take. Why do you believe it's, I'm surprised people say never. What's your take on our poll?
I'd say it's a factor of a few realities, and I'll give you kind of I was always taught the data for the brain and then the stories for the heart. So let's go with the data first. So one, you still have, 2.5%, 3% of people changing jobs every month. So when people are changing jobs like crazy, and by the way, I'm going to expand this, not just new sales opportunities. Let's also talk about renewal opportunities, growth opportunities within existing accounts. If you're not expanding, if you're not developing more relationships and multi-threading any of those, there's a fairly good probability over the course of the year. That means 36%, about a third of the people that you're talking to are going to change jobs. There's a 33% chance within that year they're gone, and you got to have something else going on. Otherwise, you're in trouble. The second reality is, now we all know the cliche. We all sell to the CFO. We all have to create business value cases and business value assessments along the way. Well, guess what? If you're talking to someone who says, this is the business case for me buying this, renewing this, whatever, and if that person's gone, and if you don't have all the other people in the buyer group scrubbed in on what that business case is and aligned and agreeing that those are the numbers, and that's how I'm going to make a case to my CFO, again, you're dead. So I think that it's kind of those 2 realities, and I'll do a third one. Back in the good old days, before the SaaS bubble burst and the valuations, unless you're called NVIDIA, your market cap's probably not that great right now. So back before in the good old days, we could, rising tide lift all ships. We talk to one person, that person talks to us, they can buy, they can renew, they can expand. Sure, they might have to go and get other members of the buyer group behind the scenes, but the amount of friction that they saw selling internally was much lower than it is now. So I think it's those combos, Meg, that got us here.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense on those combos and the data-driven and the heart-driven approach. Just thinking about our own clients that sometimes struggle with the whole concept of multi-threading, where does one start like, how do you even think about it from a strategy perspective? If you were to dive in, like, what's step one of thinking about a multi-threaded strategy?
Here's the story. Ready? Now we go to the story. And Meg, you'll like this. Meg, you remember Rich Eld at Sirius, right? Sirius Decisions. So,
oh, of course, I worked for him for more than 10 years.
I know. And it's funny that we never met then, because I used to come into Norwalk all the time. I would do the training for prospecting for Sirius Decisions before they sold the business. So one of the things that Rich Eld did, and I saw this in the very early days, is he measured new contact identification. And by the way, here's what that didn't mean. That didn't mean go into a data tool and export a big list and dump it in your CRM. That's not new contact identification. It's being very thoughtful about which contacts at which accounts and having some sort of a hypothesis around that. And his expectation, if I remember at the time, was 50 per week. And oh, by the way, that wasn't just SDRs. That was the quota carrying reps. That was the account managers that farmed accounts. I think in some cases, even some of the research analysts were expected to do that. So it was across the board, we have an organizational focus on identifying and growing relationships with people we don't know yet.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think
and it was a whole company.
Sorry, Meg, go ahead.
Yeah.
Meg, go ahead.
Oh, no, it was a whole company focus. You're right. And that was something that I think we all took to heart, that everybody who was involved with the customer was part of the team, and knowing all the people we needed to know and sharing information across sales, research, marketing, whoever needed to know it was part of the process.
And so, John, going back to your question, I like simple because I could have answered the question by saying, okay, well, we could have an SDR dedicated to existing accounts. I'm seeing that now. A lot of SDRs teams are taking a portion of the team dedicated to existing account, go broader and deeper, find new buying centers, or even go find other members of the buyer group for the existing renewal. So they're essentially doing the multi-threading on behalf of a CSM or an account manager. I actually sometimes see that taking place for the quota carrying sales team. Another thing you could insist on is, and this is something you can measure with like a conversation intelligence technology. Of course, people know the gongs, the choruses. My business exec vision was acquired by Mediafly, which is why I'm here. Same thing. Is measuring if we're asking the simple question, besides you, who else? You just ask that question, besides you, who else is involved in this decision? It's unbelievable how much people will tell you names of folks you've never heard of before that are kind of hanging out behind the scenes. What role do they play? How much influence do they have? Then you can kind of ascertain, are they technical buyer, user buyer? Are they potentially an adversary? How do they have any people they're working with or any vendors that they like? Oh, they really like this vendor. Well, now I know it's an adversary, right? So just simply asking who else, what's their role, so powerful.
I think you're exactly right. And how then can you help sales teams embed that into their process? What's the best way? Are there tools that you think people can use to prompt that? Are there ways to set up your CRM? What would you recommend?
It's a great question. So you can obviously tweak the data tools to kind of prompt it. I'm a big fan of Navigator now, LinkedIn Navigator now, but making sure people are enabled and trained on how to use it to find those folks, and then making sure that people are connecting with them on LinkedIn. That's a big part of it, because then when they change jobs, you follow them around. And that's something that's actually metriced, just like finding the new contacts. Did we send the connection request to them? It's binary. You did it, you didn't do it. Simple. We mentioned conversation intelligence tools, call recording transcription. So we can measure what percentage of calls did we ask about, who else is involved, or those types of questions. That's a very easy way to measure it. But really, ultimately, it always comes down to the managers, the first level managers who manage the reps, and then the second level leader up here or higher. If they have a focus on it, if it's something that comes up on their sales meetings or one-on-ones, people are going to focus, they're going to care. If it's a component on the dashboard, they're going to focus and care. And the reality is that for the vast majority of these companies, they're not. They're going to be looking at other things. And guess what? If you're not multi-threaded, your win rate, which everyone looks at, is going to be a lot lower because you're not multi-threaded. Here's another one that I'm seeing, shame on us in sales. If you think about a buyer group, opportunity contact roles in a CRM. So when you're on an opportunity, they have the contact roles area where you can put, here are all the people involved in this buyer quorum, this buyer group. That's our chessboard in sales. If you don't have that, what do you have? Nothing. So, just the simplest things like, well, I actually had a meeting earlier today where one guy I know, Jamie, brought in 3 guys I didn't. Well, guess what I did? I went, looked them up on LinkedIn. I make sure the contacts in Salesforce, I put it as a contact role, and I connected with all of them on LinkedIn. Those are all measurable. So if the leaders are measuring it, inspecting it, and they're making it a focus, people are going to care. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, you bring up a great point about contact roles. And because our consultancy does so much in systems, we constantly see companies overlook that. And the other value, quite frankly, of the contact role is it connects the campaigns to the opportunity. So from a marketing perspective, the $100,000 question is what campaigns are working. Without the contact roles and a primary contact role filled, you just don't know. Then there's secondary issues of who you market to and how you market to. But just thinking about the whole multi-threading approach, oftentimes we see companies that have an SDR or BDR function, they're rewarded to get the meeting, and a meeting is one person. What kind of compensation models have you seen that rewards the multi-threaded approach, in different companies?
Yeah, it's a great question. If it's a complex sale, I'm seeing many more of the comp plans moving to a stage 1 or stage 2 opportunity now than it was before, when it was just the SaaS land grab or whatever, whatever technology, whatever industry you're in. Other industries as well. When you get more mature, it's not about a land grab of grab as many new meetings as you can. Instead, it's let's get the right meetings with the right people that are going to actually hit a stage in our funnel, like a 1 or a 2. So that's totally the case of how the comp plans have changed. Now, here's something I would really love to see, and it's interesting going back. It's tying the 2 questions, the comp and the systems. But in your consultancy, do you ever see clients that will make it so that they have like a rule in the CRM that says you cannot advance the opportunity unless you have 1 contact role, or then from stage like 2 to 3, they have to have 2 or 3 and an economic buyer identified? Do you do that kind of thing?
Very few. It's a great question. Usually it's 1 contact role and that's it. So that's like the minimum threshold. Very few companies do the 2 or 3.
Yeah, and so what I'm starting to see now, it's actually something that we're doing here, but I'd love to see if other people adopted that, is, hey, like you cannot go into Salesforce and take it from 1 to 2 without an economic buyer. It's been one of the stage gates for that stage forever. We've not always done a great job of doing it, or we sort of skip it or cut a corner. And I would love to see people start to tie that back to comp as well, because sure, you might get lucky and close the deal. How often are you going to get lucky these days? 1 in 8, 15% win rate or something. It's not getting anybody excited. Versus if we're consistently multi-threading and consistently building business value assessments and business cases that the whole buyer group agrees to, what do our win rates go to then? I mean, we've got some customers where the win rates were like previously like 12, 13, 15%, and now they're like 35% for certain segments and certain deals, because everybody's in agreement on the problem. Everybody's in agreement on the business case for the solution.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think that would make forecasting so much more accurate for a lot of companies. If they were to say, hey, we rarely to never win a deal without these particular roles being involved. So if you're telling me that this is going to close in 2 weeks, but there are no contacts in some of those critical roles, that tells me, I think that's more of a hope than a promise. And what would you recommend to help companies kind of move into a world where they're doing that level of inspection and contact identification?
That you got to get buy-in on the why first. Salespeople, we're an interesting breed. I'm going to put myself in that breed. We don't generally connect dots very well, but we all know we like making money, right? So if we see that there is a connection between, oh, this is busy work updating the CRM and putting these contacts in, this is for management, it's not for me, and I have to do this, blah, blah, blah. No. By doing that, you're actually improving your win rate and putting more money in your pocket. So usually what I see, Meg, that works the best is you get one or two members of the team that are the most influential. They're very vocal. They're the leaders of equals. If they buy in, then the rest tend to fall like dominoes when someone kind of behind the scenes is like, no, like you actually should do this. It's going to make you more money. Like I saw, like I'm closing more stuff than I did before. I'm getting more support with resources internally. That's another big one. If I'm trying to get a sales engineer or a value engineer to build a business case, or a solution consultant for technical, if I have all that stuff ticked and tied, they're going to want to get on that call and help me. If I don't have that stuff ticked and tied, here we go again, Steve with his chasing windmills, phantom deals. And just as a quick final point on that is like, there's a couple of space launches that have happened here, right? With SpaceX did another test of the big Falcon one. We just got, NASA got people in orbit for first time in a while. Imagine if in an industry like that, they just said, oh, we're going to cut a corner here. Oh, there's a flashing red light on the computer that says don't launch. Let's go ahead and do it anyway. Like, are you kidding me? So we just have to be better about being professionals at this. Get the best people to buy in, show people the reason why, and then inspect it and beat the drum. That's how you create that organizational focus.
Yeah, I really love the windmill analogy there, chasing windmills and getting the discipline around just really going after accounts in a very structured way to free up those valuable resources because they're so tapped. I think that's an excellent way to kind of frame things up. Just out of curiosity, I know in our pre-show conversation, we were talking about actually both sides of the funnel. We were talking kind of the pre-sales and then even the post-sales. What have you seen in terms of the multi-threading differences between like the pre-sales and the post-sales efforts?
We're better about it in pre-sales generally. We're actually better about it in new business sales generally, which is, when you think about it, it's kind of ironic, right? So we get to know, it would almost be like moving into a new neighborhood and you don't get to know just like one person in the house across the street, all of them, maybe, it's like that kind of a metaphor. It's kind of ironic because aren't we supposed to know our customers really well and have customer intimacy? Now, there's something that creates this, and it creates it amongst the CSMs, and it creates this amongst the account managers. A lot of times a customer signs up, and then the next thing that they say is, don't come to me, CSM, because a lot of times CSMs are junior people or perceived as being not very value add. I want you to go work with my person over here. My person over here is some junior person. Now we got two junior people who have a weekly standing call. And over time, it's single threaded. And whatever business case you created to get the deal in the first place, nobody even knows about it. It's in a drawer somewhere. It's in some computer hard drive. And then you come around for the renewal and they're like, we're not really getting the value. Well, no kidding. You never connected it back. You never gave them anything of value. So I think when you're talking about the post-sale, the expansion side, the big important thing you need to do here is you need to force those executives who helped make the decision in the first place, get those members of the buying group re-engaged, energized around what they're trying to accomplish by putting that business case back in front of them again and again and again, and showing how what you did with that junior person is actually turning into some sort of concrete business outcomes, or if it's not, what they need to do to help. And you have to challenge them, not just in the sale, but you also have to challenge them post-sale to get the value realization and then ultimately to expand. You have to.
Yeah, I think
I see there's a question here.
Bring up a great point. We've got a great question from our, I'm not sure who that is, but wondering about making CRM hygiene a separate incentive comp measure or just a supervisory kind of measure. What would you recommend?
I used to work with this guy named Monty Jones at a company called, oh God, I can't remember what it's called now, but he said, I loved it. This guy was Mr. Accountability. He said, to be a sales professional at this business, you need to do three things to maintain your employment. Number one, hit your quota. Number two, you have to listen to one of your recorded calls per week, because we want to, if you don't listen to your calls, your customers, why should they listen to your calls? And then number three, you have to put the data in the CRM correctly. And he wasn't kidding around. When there were people, it was called on-site. When there were people who didn't do those things, they got warned once, they got warned twice, and that's it, they're gone. And all that kind of accountability went out the door when sales professionals there was the war for talent, you know what I mean, valuation bubble burst. Where after a while it was like the inmates ran the asylum. Well, the salespeople don't like it, so don't bother the salespeople. We can't lose them. They don't like it. You know, like, no, that's a bunch of bullshit. Like, we all know that people are supposed to be like eating their vegetables, and like if your kid's not like, if your kid just eats candy and crap all the time, you can't be like, you can't ask little Johnny to stop eating candy. He's not going to like that. But if he keeps doing that, he's going to end up in the hospital. So we have to take the same approach with our sales team. And you have to help them understand why. But ultimately, if you have people who are not willing to do it, and guess what? This is the hard part. Even if people are achieving quota, but frankly, those people are usually dead weight. They're usually kind of people that are bad influences on others. Sometimes you got to let them go and get people in there that are going to do things the right way. There are too many good sales professionals on the market right now. On June 7th, 2024, I know about them. If you have problems, let me know. I'll help you find people who will do that. And I'm not a recruiter, by the way.
There's a lot of people on the market. And I should just also comment, the reason that question comes up as anonymous, we're broadcasting this across 3 different networks. And it's likely that this person's coming off of Steve's network onto my primary broadcast. So whoever asked that great question, thank you. If other people have questions, feel free to ask the questions. You may even want to put your name at the end of it as well. But this technology is so new that I think we're all kind of learning from it at the same time. So thank you for the great question. And then, maybe just pivoting for a second toward buying centers and kind of trends that you're seeing there. Next week, I think we've got a special guest in a similar vein, Evan Lang, who's the CEO of Lean Data, who will be joining us, and he'll be talking a lot about buying centers. But I'm curious about your point of view in terms of trends or opportunities that you've seen there, or maybe blind spots from a seller perspective on buying centers.
Yeah, so if you look at buying centers and you look at the roles, you've got your kind of classic economic buyer, user buyer, technical buyer. People use the term sometimes champion or coach. People have different variations of that. I'm going to define that as someone who wants you to win and they have influence over the rest of the buyer group. One trend I'm seeing is a predominance now of an explosion, I'd say, in fact, of what I'll call friends. Friends are coaches. They want you to win. They'll give you information, but they have no influence over the buyer group. They can't organize a meeting with other people. So now, if salespeople are trained on this and know about it and you reinforce it, then it will quickly become evident when you have that person that will tell you anything you want to hear, whisper those sweet nothings in your ear, and then nothing happens afterwards. You just have to milk them for the information as a friend and then get out of the friend zone and go to the people who do have influence over the buyer group. That's still very valuable. So I'm seeing a lot more friends. And I think that's also because people change jobs so fast is part of it. I'm also seeing a lot more foxes. I learned fox is the role of someone who comes in the 11th hour and derails your deal. They kind of swing in out of nowhere, not procurement, not a technical buyer, but they come out of and they derail your deal. I'm seeing a lot more foxes, and I think the foxes are coming up because of all the reductions of force, the RIFs and layoffs. I think a lot of people are in self-preservation mode. So there are people where historically they would have no voice in this decision whatsoever from some random biz ops team, but they're like, I don't want to see this company spend 250 grand because that could potentially mean that my ass is on the line for the next RIF. I'm out of here. So it's those kinds of things that I'm seeing. I'm also seeing another final thing is the idea of the economic buyer is the final point of approval to release the funds. I'm increasingly seeing the economic buyer take the form of kind of 2 people, maybe not committees, but you'll actually have, because I think that the risk aversion is at a new all-time high. So I'm seeing that like, it's kind of like if 2 people don't sign off on it, it won't get done. So I guess the overarching principle is like more complexity in buyer groups, a lot of different members, but I think the roles changing is more interesting than the analyst. The analyst's been talking forever about how many is it, 7, 8, 12, whatever. I think that the dynamics within those buyer groups and the dysfunction and all that stuff, that's the thing that's more interesting. And oh, by the way, now when you go to a new buying center over here in another business unit, quick tip, by the way, check out Perplexity, great free AI. And it will, if you say like, what are the business units of Procter & Gamble? It just nails it. So if you're going to be going into these other business units, and other buying centers. Then you got some overlap between some of the players in the buyer group of the same, maybe in corporate, but then a whole different group over here. So anyway, there's a lot going on. And basically what it comes down to is we're not playing checkers anymore, gang. We're playing chess. And if you were playing checkers, you're either selling something transactional, which AI will probably do at some point, or you're going to have a really tough time making money in sales.
Yeah. We've got two really good questions, which I'm excited for you to answer. And by the way, Perplexity put out a fake movie trailer. I'm dying to see it. It was one of their marketing campaign today. I think it just happened. I saw it. And I haven't seen the trailer yet, but I'm dying to. But we've got a question from Matt on how quickly an AE can have a discussion on product ROI. Great question. When does that ROI calculator make the most impact? Or he also used the example of the Forrester TEI report. Yep. What are your thoughts on when that typically does the most good?
Yep, and it's a little self-serving, but I'll do the plug on this. This is one of the things that Mediafly does, although a lot of companies actually use Forrester's TEI side by side with Mediafly's value selling tools. But to answer the question, I always used to think it was the end. I was wrong. I'm being exposed to new ways of thinking about that. We're seeing people using basic ROI calculators at the top of the funnel to kind of show an inbound lead. There's a there, fill out the form. I'm then seeing guided selling discovery that happens in early stage deals. They can take the form of a maturity assessment value selling tool that comes out of it, something like that, or like a TCO calculator analysis. And then, of course, it's the business value assessment at the end where you're doing the full BVA with benefits calculations, quantifying soft stuff for a finance team. So I'm actually seeing the weaving of value selling tools through the whole funnel is what's working. That's really what's working right now. So to answer the question, even insofar as like marketing should be thinking about that top of funnel, SDR should be aware of what's going on. They might not be able to ask all those questions. And then salespeople, early stage opportunities. If we're not, most salespeople very good about asking about pain, very good, uncovering problems, goals. Most salespeople not great about then, well, how are you going to measure success? What's the quantitative impact that you could potentially see? Do you even measure those things today? Funny side story in this, I'm talking to this company that they're trying to increase their new business meetings. And I said, well, do you measure it? They said, well, we measure all the meetings that we have throughout the company. I said, okay, but does that include like existing customer relationships, all that? Yep. I said, well, until you have that be a segmented measurement that's different and celebrated, you just have soup with everything mixed up together. So we've got to measure that new business meetings first. And then we'd have a baseline to say, here's how many we're getting. Here's how many we need to actually achieve our goals. So again, I did that in a first scheduled call. I'm going to take that and that will eventually be an input to the BVA, but that's going to happen later on. But I can already do a follow-up email quantifying some of those things right out of the gate.
A great answer there, and the questions are piling in here toward the end of our conversation. But Brian asked a great question here about how do you master the multi-threading with the need to get to the executives or C-suite?
Brian Shea, awesome, love it, good hearing from you. And I mean, look, you can answer this question better than I could, but the reality is that unless you're bringing some sort of a business case, you're probably not breaking into the C-suite. So we better have that, buttoned up in advance to break in. Otherwise it ain't going to happen.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, right? If you're going to engage an executive buyer, you've got to tell them something they don't know and make them look good. And if neither of those things are possible, you're kind of dead in the water. But related to that is Lanise's question, which is, as you think about the 2 to 3 contacts you want to engage, how do you know what roles they are in the buying committee and how might you communicate differently? And yeah, I've got an opinion on this too, but I'm super curious to hear what Steve has to say.
I have sort of a sneaky level of questions to ask. I'll frequently ask them about like, hey, what other stuff have you been involved in buying? What did that look like? What role did you play in those kinds of things? But I also do it in such a way that it's fairly disarming that they usually go right along with that. And sometimes I say, well, I haven't purchased anything B2B at the company. Oh, okay. So now, look, right off the bat, now you know, like how much influence do they have? That's a big open question mark red flag for the future to fill in. So I like to ask a lot of questions because past behavior usually dictates future behavior, and that usually reveals what I want. Or alternatively, you kind of have a sidebar with another member of the buyer group, sometimes a friend even who doesn't have influence, but they'll tell you. You know what I mean? They'll give you all that inside baseball. So now all of a sudden, you know, like Lanice might not have the biggest title, but boy, does she have a lot of influence over here. Like, you better make sure you get her on board. So anyway, two things, but Meg, go ahead.
Oh no, I was kind of thinking of it if from a marketing angle to say you want to interview your sellers and also do call reviews and say what roles tend to be present, what titles tend to be present in most of our buying journeys, and what part do they play. And so there's kind of a qualitative, quantitative aspect to that. But I love what you're also saying, which is ask your buyer. Right? Get them to help you identify because it's going to look different in every organization to an extent. I think you can get 80% of the way with understanding what your past buying groups have looked like, but you still need to ask those questions. And I think you bring up a really important point. And thank you for the question, Lanice.
And actually, Meg, there's one more interesting point on that I just thought of as you were talking, which is if historically, like your marketing team mapped that all out, in our world, we're selling to, head of sales or rev ops is going to be there. A second level sales leader almost always there. Product marketing is almost always there. And you're probably going to see some sort of a head of solution consulting, pre-sales, and or value engineering. So if I say, besides you, who else? And if I get 3 of those 4, I go, it's interesting. Usually the head of enablement's also part of that. What role would they play here? And they go, oh, in enablement, that person's really like a training guy. Don't worry about him. He'll just fall in line. Or sometimes they go, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. We do have a new head of enablement. Who's that? What role do they play? And that's the thing, is like a lot of times the buyers don't know how to buy. Let's also stop and remind ourselves of that. Like people hear these questions a lot of times, especially when I work with like younger teams, and they're like, I don't feel comfortable asking that. I think that's an inappropriate question. I think that's too awkward. And I go, okay, I understand that, but buyers are asking us to ask these things because they don't know how to buy. They need our help and our support. If you look at analyst surveys and things like that, buyers are looking for sales professionals that guide them through the process. So get over yourself. It's not awkward. Just go ask them.
Yeah, and hopefully the first time they get a positive response to doing just that, to asking the question, they'll be like, oh, it's not so bad. I'll do that next time.
Not bad.
Steve, thank you. This has been amazing and so helpful, and love all the questions that you're getting to. That's always a sign of a good show. John, any parting words or questions from you?
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Steve, for engaging us here. Excellent discussion, excellent conversation. Really thoughtful question from Lanice, because I was thinking about how marketers in half the use cases, SDRs or BDRs, feed into a marketing function. And Meg and I are trained more on the marketing side. Like Steve, you're more trained on the sales side. It's not a natural thing for marketers to be asking the kinds of questions that Lanice just asked. I think she's highlighting a blind spot and a potential opportunity too, because those SDRs need that coaching. And, where do they get that coaching if the marketer has never owned SDRs or is new to their role? I think a lot of your advice here, or hiring a Steve, for example, or your company would probably be really helpful to do, because I think a lot of marketers would have blind spots there. So I think it was an excellent question by Lanice.
John, one last point real quick is in terms of that marketing function, I have one client I've seen do this, and it's brilliant, is once they get in the door, almost always when someone gets in the door, they turn off the account-based marketing engine and advertising and all those other things. They actually do the other. They flip it. They turn it up, because basically once they say, now we have a toehold, we want to like double down on the marketing air cover to make sure we get as many people in that buyer committee as we possibly can exposed to what we're all about. It's very clever, and not a lot of companies do that, I haven't seen.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. Well, great conversation here, Steve. Thank you for investing the time. And as I mentioned, next week, first of all, if you got any value from this, like and subscribe in the upper corner. You can get subscription to our free videos. We've got hundreds of go-to-market best practices. So if you got any value from this, or tell a friend for next week. Next week, we're joining with Evan Lang, who's the CEO of Lean Data. We'll continue Steve's conversation about buying committees with Evan. And we'll see you same time next week.
Thanks, everyone. Happy Friday.
Thank you.